Hi, David.
Hi Lily, I'm looking forward to this. This is our last webinar, our last lecture, if you want, on the RAILect course.
Yep, responsible AI for lectures, and this one's on to looking to the future.
Looking to the future it is. And we are physically together. People might notice if they look at the video that we are actually not on a distance call. It's really great.
It's very nice. It's very nice.
And this is because we're at a workshop in Kenya, where, of course, one of the topics which is of interest is responsible AI. And broadly, we're working with lecturers on the future of education and using electronic resources in education. It's an American Institute of Mathematics workshop. It's a really exciting event because it is the first ever such workshop to be held in Africa.
No, absolutely. I found that very enjoyable time.
Yeah. It's always where we're starting.
It's always where we're starting. I'm sure that people are very bored of this by now.
I'm not, but that's because I'm sort of obsessive. I still can't quite believe how good a study this was in so many ways.
And I've been, as you say, we're at this thing this week. I've mentioned it quite a few times, and other people haven't heard of it yet, and are quite surprised by the results.
Yeah, and
I think that the emphasis that I'm finding is that the fact that third year, the fact that so there was AI generated answers submitted to examiners from there was actual answers submitted to examiners generated by humans, and then an extra 33 scripts were snuck in, which were AI generated. And of those, we see that for the first and second year, on average, they outperformed the actual students, but in the third year, they didn't. On average, outperform the students.
Yeah. And to me, although that's a really important point, that's just a question of where the line is. And that line will move over time. To me, what's so powerful about this is also the fact, as we've discussed, that very few of the scripts that were AI generated were identified. And in fact, I saw a news article again just this week where there was a sort of the fact it's suddenly surprising that these checking algorithms aren't working. AI scripts are passing through. And for me, that's not a surprise. There is an arms race, if you want, between these two. And the detection tools are broadly always going to be imperfect. That's my conclusion.
And I mean, I don't want to sell this for too long, but what I find funny is when I Google AI detection tools, the first hit might be, how to detect it, and here's a tool to detect it, and then the second hit might be, hey, here's how to get around the detection for students. And I just find it funny that
it is an arms race. And so we've re-emphasized throughout this the whole course, if you want, this is our last part of the course, that getting caught up in that race is not what's needed. It's not constructive. One of our strong recommendations for lecturers is that even in the future, don't look to tools for AI detection as part of your armory. Look to have tools in your education and your pedagogical oh, thank you. Yes. Well, okay, let's go in and let's dig into this. This is because this really relates to what you've got here. The nevers.
Yes.
Never rely on AI detection tools is one of our strong recommendations.
Yeah. So there's these 4 different ways where AI is likely to evolve in the future: the nevers, the whens, the ifs, and the unknowns, the maybes. We're not sure yet.
So let me just reframe this, because we've discussed this in the past, but this isn't as obvious as it might seem. So AI is advancing extremely fast. There are elements where what is possible today is not representative of what will be possible in the future. And so people are often lost knowing, well, what can be done today versus what will we be able to do in the future. Where are we at? And so what we're trying to do with the nevers, the whens, the ifs, and the unknowns is to give a personal, and I should say it's informed, but we may be wrong, please don't sue us if we get it wrong. But I don't think we are on the way we're thinking about these. And the key thing is actually using this framework can be useful, we hope, for lecturers as they think about what is possible now and what is going to be possible in the future. And I had stolen a bit of the thunder, so let's go into the nevers then, because I think the key thing we have there is this example.
Yeah, so the nevers are these kind of areas where it's never going to happen, that AI can never achieve certain outcomes.
Yes.
Of course, AI can be used for detection, but is that sensible?
Well, there are contexts within which we will have to use tools of AI detection. And so, yes, it is sensible. However, AI detection will never be perfect. It will always have false positives and false negatives.
Yeah.
And so the question is, in certain cases where we have to use it, is that acceptable? Is it good enough?
Sure.
But it will never be perfect. Well, and that's just like many things in life, they'll never be perfect. The question is, given it will never be perfect, are there ways that we should or shouldn't be using it? And so I would, and this is sort of the case for not just AI detection tools, yeah? It is the case that with, for any classification, you always need to be thinking about the fact that there will be false positives and false negatives. And I want to come back very briefly to our original example of the post office.
Okay.
Because this is now 30 years on, give or take. And as I understand it, the systems, the algorithms that now exist are more accurate than any human sorter could ever have hoped to be. But they're still not perfect.
Sure, yes.
But it doesn't matter that they're not perfect because the systems around them are in place to deal with the cases where they get it wrong. Yeah, that's still there. It just gets it wrong a lot less often. If we were to dismantle those things in place, then we could get into trouble. But you can't really dismantle the fact that at the end, the letter's probably going to a human. If we do get personal assistant AI bots in our houses who read our mail for us, now we could be into but I'm not worried about that case. So, those human systems are still in place. So let's come back to the case for lecturers, because we are making the case that for lecturers, it will never make sense to use AI to do AI detection. Not because it's not going to get good. It's going to get better and better. And there are going to be things like journal articles, journals, they're going to have to use it without a doubt.
Yeah.
However, for lecturers, using it on their students, my claim is the fact that there are false positives and false negatives in the way mean that if you're putting your tasks in place so that they rely on correct AI detection, you have to think through how you deal with both false positives and false negatives. And so ideally, a false positive, as in a case where the AI detection thinks that it is not AI detected, it is human generated, That's a positive response, yeah. But it's not, it's AI generated. Well, you want to be in your third year class scenario,
Sure.
where the AI generated content gets a lower grade on average than your human generated content, because otherwise you're putting in place a situation where the incentives are wrong.
But as you said at the start, that line is going to shift.
Absolutely. And so this is hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that, what I'm saying is that is the sort of thing you would want to be in place if you wanted to rely on AI detection tools.
Yeah.
You'd want to be in the place where actually it doesn't matter if a few things slip through, because maybe those people will have done less work, but they're sort of cheating themselves, because if they had done the work, they could have done better. So that's sort of what you want.
Yeah.
And that's hard. This is really, really hard. But more importantly, you also want to consider the false negatives, because these are probably going to be biased towards minority groups.
As we've seen so far in different case studies of it being it's picking up on students that use certain languages, which might, or a certain kind of way of speaking.
And the reason for that is obvious, because it's trained on the majority of data. So it's sort of thinking of so it's not got as much data on minority groups. And so therefore it's saying, well, I don't recognize this pattern I do, or see what I mean? So it's normal that sort of these rare cases, if there were lots of people who, relatively common cases getting caught, then lots of people would be getting false negatives, and therefore it would be fixed. Yeah. So I think you've got to worry about the biases of who is getting caught out by the false negatives and being incorrectly classified as having used AI. And that's really hard. The sort of ways that I would imagine doing that might be, for example, if you have someone classified as having used AI, before assuming they've used AI, you give them the benefit of the doubt and you give them an oral to make sure that they understand that they've assimilated, they associate with what has been written and how it is there, that they take ownership for it. If they don't take ownership for what they've created, now the probability of it being AI generated is pretty much, this is certain, because if they'd written it, they would understand it, they would know it.
But you can't give an oral exam to your false negatives, to your false positives, to your students, because you don't know who slips through. Exactly. And I'd argue that the students that have managed to get away with it are going to be your students that know how to use it better. In fact, it was just this week that it might have been
recently,
in the last week anyway, in the last 10 days, when I was on ChatGPT and it came up with a new way to use it. And it said, oh, here's a new plugin, a new add-on, where you can use it to not sound like ChatGPT. And it literally says in it, we won't, this will not use words like delve and empower, we'll change our language for you.
Yeah. And so people, as you say, students are going to get better. It's an arms race.
Yeah.
And so I agree. The false positives you can't necessarily identify. The point is you're expecting there to be relatively few people or scripts that are identified as being that. And so investigating all of those, I would argue the false positives are dangerous for incentives.
Yep.
The false negatives are dangerous, full stop, because incorrectly identifying someone as AI generated, someone's content or script as being AI generating is devastating. This is sort of you're accusing someone of cheating who didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And that is happening. There are documented cases. And so that's the one we need to really think about carefully, because that is devastating. And there's nothing someone can easily do. You can't suddenly change the way you write and so on. If you've got caught out into being a sort of minority group in whatever way, which gets identified as this, you're either having to change yourself to be not confused as being AI. That's the ones we really want to protect against.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that this is always going to be a risk with classification in AI. Just the question is where is it that your false negatives and your false positives can cause these sorts of problems?
And my claim, very simply, is lecturers have easier and better ways to interact. And so relying on the detection tools is never going to make sense, because the effort to deal with the false positives and the false negatives and to try and think about all that is not worth it for the gains you get.
Yeah.
And so it is better to try and design tasks and to set up structures so you don't need to use detection tools. And I'd go as far as suggesting that you should never need to use detection tools as part of the educational mix.
Great, great. I mean, I do just want to add that there are some instances where, this doesn't mean that AI is not good for any form of classification.
No, of course not. And it doesn't mean even for AI detection that you should never use it. As we say, I think journal articles is a different scenario. There, things are pretty high stakes in a different way. The problems of false negatives can be, it is worth putting in place structures to protect against them, and then to actually maybe giving authoring support for such people in different ways. It is worth sort of being careful about the false positives. But at the end of the day, if a good journal article has had AI used to author it, and it's sort of not protected by humans, and it's not protected by the systems, it's not going to do that much harm to the system, I would argue. And so I think journals are a different one. I think you just have to accept there might be some false positives and scripts that get through, and false negatives. And I don't think it's actually as clear cut as that for a journal article. And I believe that is a use case where AI detection tools are needed. But lecturers, too complicated. It's not worth your time. That's my claim.
Great. The whens.
Let's go into it.
And so the whens are kind of areas where existing tools will, or can, or will?
I believe it's will. Well, no, it's can, because people may not choose to ever do something like this. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So
have the potential to eventually achieve what is currently unachievable.
Yeah.
And so these are things which kind of have practical challenges at the moment, but in the future might be.
Yeah, I mean, I love Amazon's Just Walk Out as an example of this.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I love it is because when it came out, those of us who are pretty well informed about it were skeptical. I thought, I don't know. That's not an easy task. Wow, they must have really moved far to be able to do that.
And sorry, the Just Walk Out is that you walk into a shop, you can pick things up, put it in your basket, and just walk out. And then later on, you get this email or this message that says, here's your receipt, and we've charged your card directly. Because we know we've got AI models and things that have watched you around the shop and know what you've picked up.
And this is a demonstrably hard task for a large supermarket in context. And so when this came up, there were those of us who sort of understand how hard a task that is, who would have said, wow, things have moved on further than I expected. And then it turns out a few years later that after a number of years, they were still not moving on from using essentially training centers in low resource environments to watch people shopping and see what they put in the basket to train the models. Now, to me, this just shows that they didn't actually do the hard work to think through how they needed to train the models in the first place. And the whole point is something like that. If I was taking on that particular problem, I would want to reduce the complexity first, solve it in specific instances, and then put multiple instances of that together. But almost certainly they didn't have the training data to do that properly, because what they were doing was they were actually training on the whole thing that the person did. But now, so that's just, and people can spend 40 minutes shopping. So watching someone spending 40 minutes shopping and then expecting the AI to match up on that. You want to break it up into sort of, 5-10 second snippets where you're actually taking or putting back a single item and seeing where an individual item can get identified and so on. And that's what I assumed they were doing. Now, it might be that that is what they were doing. But the point is that's a solvable problem. For any specific item, I believe enough training data will be able to get a high percentage of success rate with very few false positives and very few false negatives. Yeah, and that's something which over time can be improved and iterated on. But you want to start in a sort of more constrained environment, and this is sort of in a constrained environment. I'm absolutely convinced that the current tools are more than capable of doing this with acceptable levels of error.
Yep.
And so the problem in my mind was about how you put all of those things together to get the sort of 40-minute shot from small snippets. That was the problem that I envisaged. I see that as a hard problem. I mean, actually being able to sort of convert and identify which of these identification processes you're actually on at the time. There's all sorts of complications there where I'm not surprised this is hard. But the right way to train it, in my mind, is not necessarily the data that they seem to be doing when it came out that they were still using these sorts of centers where people were just watching and so on. So I guess the key point with this as a when is that there is no reason, I believe, why the current technologies put together, strapped together in different ways, could not achieve this task in a way which is acceptable. Which is why those of us who were impressed they could do it, didn't really challenge it. Because it is, I believe, within the realms of what is possible. And there's how much computing power it would take to do this properly and well, especially in a crowded supermarket where things get crazy. I have no idea. But in theory, this is a solvable problem within the current resources. And that's, I believe, again, if Amazon had wanted to really solve it, then it would have been just a matter of time as to how long. But the point which I think came out, and I think the reason this had to shut down, if I've understood correctly, is that they'd potentially slipped into the stage where it was not cost effective to really try and solve it, but it was highly cost effective to remove the manpower from the shops in expensive places and have that done by people watching the videos in low resource environments. And that is unethical.
Yes. Okay. Well, and now they're using they're planning to, or they are using different technology altogether. They're
absolutely
stopping this.
They're stopping that particular route. They're using a different technology, and the technology they're using is actually surprisingly innovative.
Yeah.
It's something which already exists. It's pretty effective, and and so anyway, we don't need to delve any more into sort of what they are using. Yeah, I'm obviously really just an AI bot because I used the word dev.
It's alarm bells in my head. Anyway.
What's happening? Where's my AI script? My AI generated script. Sorry.
Anyway, and then you've also made a case with me about teachers and the when. And
yes. And so I think this element where the use of AI to support improvements in automotive grading systems with personalized feedback. There are already systems there doing this. I would argue that there is still a step improvement possible. And I think there are challenges as how to do that. But I believe that, again, this is something which there's no new technology needed to be able to achieve some of those step improvements. It is just the way we put in effort and resources to doing this is where, at the moment, it might not be directed, I think, towards where, I don't know if it's the technical challenge or the actual challenge is. So let me see if I can, you have a lot of systems out there which sort of claim to give automatic grading and personalized feedback in different ways. And a lot of them are doing pretty well. And a lot of them have elements of AI as part of the system. So what's the gap? And I think you also, and we've discussed this in the past, things like, we're heading towards the personal tutor. With that in mind, if you want, conceptually, I believe that before you get to a personal tutor, I believe an AI-based personal tutor, I believe there is an element of being able to identify personalized pathways where I'm not wanting to take away from the groups who are working on this. There are groups working on this, but where actually there are AI is being used to help identify misunderstandings in a systematic way. And I'm thinking now towards the post office example, where we set up the structures so that certain types of response are gradually over time getting the data as to the nature of that, that misconception. I have a feeling we could put in place structures where, when I sit next to a student and see what they're doing and they show they're working, I'm quite good, if for mathematics, not for other subjects, please. I'm quite good at identifying the nature of the misunderstanding. I believe if we put in place systems to learn this better, we should be able to get AI systems that are better than me. And I don't believe they exist yet.
That would be nice.
It would be nice.
Because you are very good at it. I know from experience you are very good at it. I'd love it if there was a system that could
identify and say
misunderstandings or
and pick out and actually therefore give appropriate feedback which is personalized to that misunderstanding based on essentially these learning cycles as to how that is done. Now, some of the reasons I think this isn't in place is I think that the technologies to actually get the data to start to feed that are only just coming into place. So I think it's not, but I think everything is there. It's just that the coherent effort to really do that. And I believe that, if a commercial group is trying to do it, they will never be able to say they are doing it and everybody know that it's true. Any commercial group where their algorithms are not open and aren't testable and aren't sort of something where people can actually check what is it doing and what has been brought out, what's the learning, what's the conclusion, anything which is closed and hidden, doesn't matter how good they've got. In some sense, we don't know. And my guess is, if ever somebody went in and looked, let's say have a certification program, my guess is they would not be doing anywhere near as well as maybe they think they are, or as we could do on some objective measures, because I think that they won't have enough data. I think the only way to really get there is to get massive amounts of data on this in different ways, which would enable this. And it's not just the data, it's the experts. You need then the word experts to be able to do this. And so the only efficient way I think to actually do that would be to do it with a relatively open system so that it can be checked and all the rest of it. Now, from my perspective, this is really exciting because actually, and let me put this into perspective. As you said, I am quite good at that. I'm arrogant enough to recognize things I'm quite good. And so I'm not the only one who's really good at this. There's other leading word experts around who are better than me, or who are better at me in certain ways, and we could complement each other. And so you kind of need your word experts to be working on this. It's not enough to have people who are good, because you want to be better than the best. And so you want to have a system where you can draw in real world experts, not one or two, but the community behind a single project to actually get this done once and for all. And then it can be slotted into all systems, commercial, non-commercial, and so on, because this is a scholarly effort, I believe, to get these things actually trained up to a certain level. And then the automated training systems, the humans you want in the loop should include the word experts, because there should be research happening onto misconceptions. This is an active area of research, and that needs to then feed in. And so gradually over time, you're feeding in the latest cutting edge research understanding of misconceptions as it goes on. And that's the system that I believe the technology is there to achieve it, but I don't see the structures yet there. And it's a huge time and resource sink. So this is something where I don't see how we'd get from where we are now to what I would love to see, but I do think it's possible. And I do think the current technology is sufficient. So it's a when.
It's very interesting. And I can see in there your kind of, from the students' perspective of them being told, okay, we think that you've misunderstood it this way. I mean, it's quite immediately clear that those kind of human feedback loops of where it gets it wrong, because the student kind of can then see if that's what they have misunderstood or not.
And you can check when they next try it, do they now get it right, because you've correctly identified the misunderstanding, and they've done it, and they now misunderstand it in a different way, or do they misunderstand it in essentially the same way because actually the feedback isn't serving their needs and it's not correcting the misunderstanding and so on. So yes, these human feedback loops can be there.
Yeah.
It's just actually getting the data from that to feed back in ways is really hard. And as I say, there are commercial systems that are working towards this. But I believe that they are, by definition, underestimating the scale of the problem if they have closed systems to do it, because you need leading word experts because it's active research to understand misunderstandings. Anyway.
Yeah.
Should we go to the ifs?
Yes, let's go to the ifs. And so while my understanding anyway is while the whens are these kind of incremental changes, the ifs are more these kind of breakthroughs.
Yeah, I think there's areas where there's current work happening which could lead to a breakthrough. But a breakthrough is probably needed. The current systems aren't enough. Now, what's interesting is, carry on, but what's interesting is that some of these, I would argue, could actually end up happening faster than the whens. Yeah?
Okay, yes, yeah, okay.
And I think the examples you've got here, which I apologize to those of the lecturers who are in other areas. Carmigo is across many disciplines, but it's really come out of the maths. And I would argue that the maths is probably where getting it right is most likely to happen first, partly because of the work in the second example, the deep mind sort of work, and not just the deep mind work, but the other work which is happening to do this. So maybe let me explain with these examples what we mean by the ifs exactly.
Yeah.
So I believe that with the current technologies, the systems which are broadly being put in place are based on things like the large language models, where we've discussed the fact that this is about the language, not the substance.
Yep.
Now, DeepMind has been working on these more substantive elements, and they recently, and we mentioned this, I think, before, won the silver medal at the Maths Olympiad, and we're very lucky that it's one of our colleagues was part of that team. and it's really exciting work.
He still won't break his non-disclosure agreement and tell me about it.
Exactly. This is reasonable, I'm afraid. But you know, this is something where what that has achieved and the way it's achieved it is it does have real substance understanding, that it's got structures in place which are able to formalize mathematical proof in certain ways, that you can then have AI systems which know correctness and which are able to establish correctness in different ways, mathematical correctness. And what that means is that you can be confident that anything that comes out of those systems is correct, substantively true, rather than, you know, because it would go round in circles and never end until it gets something which is true.
Yes, and so what he's, well, and from articles as well, is that but obviously he's also here this week, so I've been having a few conversations about it with him, and it's it either gives an answer, which is definitely true, or it says I can't do that. And as you say, it was a silver, but one thing that he keeps emphasizing is that it was 1 point off a gold. And okay, that's a good point. And the Maths Olympiad is his kind of set of questions that are given to kind of the best or the best young mathematicians, and if you're getting gold, you're seen as kind of world leading. If you get silver, that's pretty exceptional.
And the interesting thing, of course, was that it was this zero or nothing. You know, so everything or nothing. So everything or nothing. Either that silver was obtained not like humans would obtain it, with getting partial marks here and there. The system either nailed it. In fact, one case, as I understand it, they nailed it in a way which humans had never really done. And so and that's really, this is exactly what's exciting. And this is sort of, I think there was sort of some of the work on Go. There was a similar instance where the solution the algorithms came up with led to a move that would never be played by human players and seemed just totally out of place. But it led to this sort of change of state that, anyway. And I think this is what, so there are really exciting things coming out of this. This is deep mind work. And why is that relevant for the Khan-Migo? Well, we've said before, the Khan-Migo sort of work, their deep insight was to separate out and have these multiple layers. Now, if you have these layers where you can trust it cannot be wrong in some sense, because that's how it's designed. It either has an answer or it doesn't have an answer. But if there is an answer, it's trustable. Now, let's be clear here. This is easy in mathematics compared to many other subjects. History, getting something which is demonstrably true, is much, much harder. And I wouldn't know what that would look like even. But for mathematics, this is achievable. And so that sort of breakthrough of actually having those systems deeply embedded and integrated with other systems, which then do the communication layer, I believe the current work, it's possible that some of these breakthroughs have happened, but they're not yet fully integrated. And then it would really be a question of when. But I don't know how far these breakthroughs are. This is cutting edge research, you know, and as you say, we can talk to our colleague, but we can't really get deep enough to know exactly where it is. So
in a few months, you say. In a few months,
exactly. But I think, but even then, the question of exactly where these systems are now compared to the problems, because this is a sort of 0-1 game. Either the systems have now got to the stage where they can be used for a specific application, or they're not there yet. And I don't know.
And as we've said with kind of generative AI earlier in the course, generative AI kind of is very good at that style. It's very good at saying kind of, okay, here is the information now. Can you modify it?
Yes.
But it's not so good at that kind of substance side of actually it's not reliable on that substance.
Well, this is the thing, and so therefore the two layers are needed.
Yes, whereas these kind of breakthroughs that are kind of Carmigo and DeepMind are working on are on this, my understanding, is on this more substance side. And then your style's like your tutor.
Well, so Carmigo, what they've done is they've separated the two.
Yes, sorry.
That's their, and there is work then happening at the substance level by multiple actors in multiple ways, and I guess the key point is where it is now, and this is where I feel the ifs are. You know, some people will tell you, oh, but you know, it's done or it's good enough. Good enough for what? And the devil's in the detail for this. If you have some particular applications, and I think the key example would be this personalized tutor. I would argue it's easier to get a reliable personalized tutor for mathematics, but I don't know yet if the underlying algorithms sort of are good enough yet that you could build the kind of Amigo personalized tutor for mathematics that is as reliable as I would want it to be. I am pretty confident you can't do it for history. So you would only be able to do it for history if there were other advances which led to sort of being able to get that reliability and I don't know what that would look like. For mathematics, there's still an if in my mind, but the technology might already exist or it might not. And that's sort of where there's uncertainty. And so the breakthroughs which are happening, are they good enough that for mathematics, we could build that personalized tutor, which really gets the content right every time. And then it's just a question of training how it communicates. And that's separation. That would be, yeah. Anyway.
I think that this is an area where, like, if we had this conversation a month ago as well, would have
exactly
a completely different conversation.
Well, I mean, no. I think what's important is a month ago, this conversation for the mathematics tutor, we'd just have said, well, it needs a breakthrough.
Yes.
Whereas now I'm having to say, well, that breakthrough might sort of have happened or be happening, and I don't know. But that's the it. If that breakthrough happens, then I believe we're moving to the when of just when people build those tutors out. Yeah. Whereas there is a need for a breakthrough, there has been a need for a breakthrough, and that people are working on it. If it happens, if that breakthrough happens, wow, it could be quite quick. And because I think the other parts of the structure, now there's other things, it might not be quick. Then it just moves into a when, because it's possible to do. But how do you get the training systems in place? And how do you, so then I think we would move to a when, and I don't know. I hope it's quick because it's transformative, societally transformative to get these tools. And they will be disruptive again, I think, in ways which only for mathematics, I think in the short term, there is a risk of actually having a further disruption, which I hope could be a positive disruption because of this. But anyway, the ifs.
The ifs. I'm sure we could keep talking. I'm sure we could do.
But we should,
podcast itself on just one of these. But let's go to the unknowns. So this is an image generated by Google's Gemini, which is going to be one of our examples in the unknowns.
Yeah.
But these are kind of unknown future possibilities in AI. It's unclear of kind of which category it falls in.
Yeah.
It's unclear if it's ever possible or if it's
yeah.
And so Google's Gemini, so this is where we don't know the potential, we don't know the limitations of these technologies, but Google's Gemini is our kind of case study here, where actually it was being used to create images, and they put in it that system to be diverse, and people kind of say, like, they think that to any argument you asked Google to ask Gemini to give you, it would then kind of automatically tag on there as a diverse image.
Yeah.
But kind of, there's people that have asked for a 1943 soldier, which is kind of historically inaccurate, or kind of US senators from the 1800s, a pope. There's never been a female pope. A girl with a pearl earring, George Washington, and Greek philosophers. these are just some of the examples I found online, of which then led to this scandal of it being kind of overly diverse.
And the key point here is it comes back to the history problem, because the problem is not that they were made diverse. The problem is that historically they weren't diverse.
Yes.
And so therefore you are introducing historical inaccuracies. So why this really matters, but I don't know. This is a hard problem. You know, I don't know whether it's ever going to be possible to get this right, because, and what right even means on this, I think this is not a never, because there is certainly immense progress that I think could be made. And I think even within current technologies and tools, there are improvements that could be made. There are breakthroughs that I think could further improve. But it is possible you're still in this sort of never scenario where your classification's always going to have false positives and false negatives. So there could be an element of this sort of being always potentially having false positives and false negatives relating to historical inaccuracies. But our knowledge of history is imperfect as well, so that might not matter. Yeah, it's not like the classifications where the consequences of the false positives and the false negatives are very present and real today. If it got good enough, if we could get things good enough, then it might be that the historical inaccuracies are less than the historical inaccuracies due to our documentation of what was there at the time. And so if that was the case, then we wouldn't need to worry. Does that make sense? There's sort of, so it might be able to get good enough if the advances. Now, with current technologies, I don't believe we could get things good enough. I think what Gemini's tried to do is to be applauded, but I don't think they can succeed. The fact that they're trying to make sure that in the biases in their data don't necessarily translate into the outcomes in certain ways is really important for us as a society.
Yes.
But the consequences for that, for the historical accuracy, are unacceptable and correctly unacceptable. And I don't believe the technologies are there in our current form to resolve this. I think this is something where research is really needed. But it's also somewhere where, you could be putting immense amounts into the research and still not get to something which is societally acceptable. And this is what I would have as an unknown. This is a really hard. I'm certain you can have advancements from where it is now. And I believe there is an end state which would be societally acceptable and something which I would recommend. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to get there because I don't know where those lines are about how, it's just unknown. and accepting that this is fine, this is okay, but being able to recognize these cases where it's unknown. And I would argue that it's very interesting, and I keep coming back to sort of comparing the maths and history as being, for me, the maths is now an if. If we get these advances, we will get to somewhere which is societally acceptable. We will get to these powerful tools. Whereas for history, I definitely won't say never, but I don't know. Yeah, it's unknown as to whether we could get AI systems with acceptable societal historical accuracy. I don't know.
And it'll be interesting to see where kind of Gemini goes from here. Because my understanding is when this scandal came out, they said, okay, we're going to pause it while we fix this.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you going to fix it? Are you going to remove that diversity? Are you going to just add in there a tag unless it's a historical image? Then don't make it overly diverse. I'm really interested to say, all of these are going to create new. We'll see. It's very fun.
It is. It's fun and it's hard. I mean, I have real feelings. I would not like a job where I had the responsibility to try and do this and manage the public expectations on this, because, as I say, with the current tools, I don't think it's possible to get something which would be societally acceptable. Given that, the forerunners, the early adopters, so to speak, of these technologies to try and build these tools, they're going to get societal backlash, and so to have that courage to go out there and to put something out and see what the response is to it, and it might be that it gets accepted by society, which is what's happened to the likes of ChatGPT and many other tools, even though it is not societally acceptable because it has biases in it which society is condemning it for, but it's the best that can be done at the moment. And so societal acceptability is a tricky one.
Yeah, because, well, at the moment, I can say, make this diverse. I mean, but then to be fair, at the moment with ChatGPT, when I say, DALL-E is their kind of image generating ChatGPT, but with that, even if I ask for diversity, it still sometimes fails to give it to me. Sometimes you can specifically highlight things on it. Sometimes I have to specifically highlight people and be like, I want diversity here.
And I think that the thing is that somehow societally at the moment, the lack of diversity is more acceptable than historically inaccurate diversity, which is very interesting.
Yes.
Whereas, why isn't it acceptable to actually have? Why did Gemini have to roll it back? Because this is an advance, and it's very interesting to me that particular advance is societally less acceptable than a system which is imperfect in a different way, and therefore from a ethical perspective is also societally not acceptable. So it's very interesting to me what is accepted by consumers and what is rejected by consumers. Because this is, at the moment, all the systems are imperfect on this. But they're imperfect in different ways.
Yes. And I guess to Gemini's credit, it's highlighted these issues in other systems.
Absolutely. I come back to the fact that I don't believe the public backlash against Gemini was correct or justified, because the whole point is that is just showing, and I suppose this is to be expected, that the general population doesn't understand the issue it was trying to address in the first place in the current systems. It's not that the current systems are doing better. It's that their problem is somehow acceptable to many people in a way that Gemini's problem was not acceptable to people. And that's more something about our societies than about these systems. And that's exactly where some people talk about the fact that the AI systems are sort of like holding up a mirror to our society. Because the biases, the things that we're accepting, that we're not accepting, are societal issues, not necessarily, and we're not expecting AI to suddenly resolve these in the correct ways. So we do need to wrap up for lecturers. And I think the key point for the unknowns is, and I come back, historians, I apologize if you're listening and I've been picking on you. I don't mean to pick on you in a bad way, but for historians, expecting AI systems to be historically accurate anytime soon is I don't expect it. But that's also a good thing for historians. There's an unknown whether in the future you'll be able to do this, but right now, you can probably design your activities around the fact that ChatGPT and other tools are unlikely to be historically accurate. And hence, there is a possibility in the future that you'll have to readapt your materials if they become historically accurate to a reliable degree which you are happy with. But at the moment, I don't know whether that will ever happen. And this is the sort of thing where there are areas where it's just not known.
Mm.
And that would be one of them.
No, thank you. And so some final thoughts. So we've kind of grouped things into these 4 areas of the nevers, the ifs, the whens, and the unknowns.
Well, let's be clear. We've grouped some things into those. And if you had specific areas, we're interested in coming to us to have a debate. People might disagree with certain things to how we classify them, but we do think that classification is useful.
Yes, and changing.
Well, so, the classification.
Sorry, the case studies in those classifications.
Exactly.
It might be by the time that this even goes onto YouTube.
Well, no, I mean that's too short. They're not going to solve but it might be by the time you are listening to this that, for example, some of the ifs have become whens because of the technological advances, or that something has happened where an unknown now becomes actually it's clear that's possible. It's just if this specific advance happens, that would happen. So I would argue that these are changing for specific case studies, but this categorization is a useful framework to help to think through, well, what is possible, what isn't.
Yeah. And then as a lecturer, as an educator, you can then from there work out how to design your course to be robust to these potential changes that can come.
Yeah.
So AI detection tools, maybe design it in a way where you don't have reliance on AI detection, instead changing the question or having it either, or having some questions in some ways where you can't use AI.
Yes.
And some areas where you can use it and you encourage that use or you allow that use, and that's part of it, to then be
part of our systems. And it is this element of including these diversity in how we do it. And I think I like the cases that your 2 examples of something you brought out here. We've harped on about the detection tool, so I won't say anything more about that. But the idea again that we can build systems that are robust to the advances by having an idea of things that will happen in the future and planning as if they've happened now. That's the sort of thing which I think is useful. And I think that distinction between, recognizing that there are things where if you plan as if they've happened now, and then you rely on them and they're not there, then there's all these structures you need to put in place. Whereas other things, if you plan as if it's happened, but it's that just means you're more clean cut in what is possible when, and it doesn't really matter. That's a case where you can get robustness into your innovation.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts?
I guess this is the last RAILect lecture we've had. We've got our podcast series around this as well. We've got the content on the course. As the last lecture, and looking to the future, the thing I want to sort of leave people with is optimism. We don't know what the future is going to hold on this, and we don't know how this is. And many people at this moment in time aren't optimistic. There's challenges which we're facing. But we're in Kenya right now. And this is an environment where there is need for these changes, these innovations. Lecturers here who we work with and are collaborating with in amazing ways are so impressive. But these tools are going to, done well, they will disproportionately help and support. And so I want to keep that optimism that we can give better education through these tools. And I hope that this course, in whatever way it can help, it's not going to move people in that direction, but I hope that some people who take it gain the confidence to be optimistic, to actually have hope for the future of education using these new tools, because that's really what this course is about. We've brought up challenges, we've brought up issues, and so on, but we intend for this to be about hope. These tools, used well, have shown that they can and should be used so that we can give a better education and have intellectually stronger students coming out of our universities. So that's what I want to finish on.
Excellent.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much, David.
Well, thank you for all your work setting this up. I know there's been a team behind supporting, but really, we should commend Lily at this sort of part and thank her for for producing such an exciting, relevant, topical course.
Thank you. It's been a lot of
and a lot of work.
It's been very exciting though, and just because this is the last webinar, it doesn't mean that these conversations now stop.
No, on the contrary, this is when the conversations start, because the whole aim is to make these resources available. And my guess is most people listening to this, it's good time after this was recorded. And so hopefully the discussions are carrying on. We hope to remain engaged, and this will be open, anyone who wants to do it. So if you've enjoyed the course, share it with others. And hopefully this is something where we can build lecturers' confidence that there is a role for lecturers. It is not going away, but they can do a better job with AI than they could have done without it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.